today, and just to be able to continue the fellowship. Just pray that you be with the kids as they are in Sunday school, and just allow them to just, hear your word and just apply it to their lives, and just the message you speak to me today, Father, that you just, Dennis actually asked me to speak about 3 weeks ago, so it's funny that it's actually on obedience, because it's just in the 3 weeks I just thought about everything else that needed to be done, and it's just everything else going on, and I'm just like, man, it could be so much easier just to say that I wouldn't be able to do it, and just kind of just do everything else and just focus on it a little bit. Then I knew it was God talking and just saying to say yes, because it was also a great way to just get myself back into teaching, but also just my relationship with God. So it's been nice just to really work on this. He was in the stern, asleep on a pillow, and they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who can this be that even wind and sea obey? So as I was reading this passage, along with faith, it was just a great sign of also obedience and just understanding how it worked in this passage. And I was just thinking, even for myself, just being in this situation, how would we feel? It's just like, we know that God is with us, but it's just knowing. It's just like, if we were caught in a storm, if we were caught in a dire situation, what would our emotions be? Would our faith be where it should be? Would we be more fearful? Would we be overwhelmed? And just thinking, how would we actually serve at that moment, And just kind of brought it into context. So the next slide is actually, this is from the movie Jesus of Nazareth, and it's just showing a depiction of how it actually was in the storm itself.
One day Jesus got into a boat with his disciples and said to them, Let us go across to the other side of the lake. And as they were sailing, he fell asleep. Where is your faith?
So, just watching the video, it kind of gave context, it's just like the situations that we're in, it's just, we know where our faith is, and we know that Christ is with us and God is watching over us, but will our emotions take over, or will it be our obedience to God that kind of helps us through those situations? And the thing is, obedience is, our obedience can definitely waver, but it's just knowing, it's just like, are we in it to make sure that we are following through? Like in this situation, we know Jesus was resting on the boat as he was a human, as he was God in human form. The disciples began to worry as the storm grew stronger and began filling the boat. Jesus was looking for the disciples' disobedience through their faith. This disciples' obedience through their faith, and on the boat, it was not heavy. The wind and the waves obeyed Jesus, though immediately. So the questions to ask was, what affects our obedience to God? As Christians, how can we stay obedient to God during the storms of life that we face? So if the wind and wave are able to see Jesus' authority and listen, it should show how we should be following God's authority, because the worldly authority can never be greater than God and Jesus. It's just an application to how we also are living in the world. So the definition for obedience is submissive to the restraint or command of authority, willing to obey. So on this slide, I also thought about what are some ways that we see obedience in the world, As for humans, for those around us, how would they perceive obedience? So it's a little bit different. You would say there are authority figures, parents, teachers, police officers, you might have guardians, you might have other people who have authority positions. That's one way of seeing it. Personality. It can just be someone you agree with or admire or that you like. You have a tendency to definitely be more obedient or follow someone who you might like more, or who you might think about or think is cool, or just kind of see as someone you want to be more like. Situational factors. The environment can also play a role. If you're somewhere where you want to be, if you're somewhere that you're at something that you want to do, you have a tendency to obey and just follow through more in those type of situations. Rewards. People will do different things for the rewards that they can get, whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic. Avoidance. Some people may obey to avoid the negative consequences of disobeying. Just like, if it's for kids, you have homework, you have different things like that. For adults, it's just kind of making sure you do something so you don't get in trouble, whether it's for work or something that has to be paying the bills, things like that. Justification. People may justify their behavior by assigning responsibility to the authority rather than themselves. It's easy to kind of pass along also just that obedience, It's like sometimes you can just be like, hey, it might just be better for someone else to do this, Just kind of be like, I'm not ready, or it's not meant for me to be there doing it at that time. But it doesn't always mean that's either. Other one is routine, what we do on a daily basis, It's just when you're on a routine and you just do the things every day, it's more of just doing it because you're used to it. And ambiguity. For those who may have more knowledge, or those who may be able to teach you, or just show you how to do things better, you might want to obey for that reason. Alright, so this was the other slide. Characters of Christian obedience. I thought about making this slide like the other one, where it was just kind of labeling it and just giving different examples. But then it just made me think, if you look at these characteristics, love, trust, faith, sacrifice, prayer, loyalty, repentance, forgiveness, submission, humility, courage, surrender, hardship, and perseverance. All these qualities of Christianity require obedience in order to help us grow as believers and in our relationship with Christ. If you think about it, and the reason why I have unwavering in parentheses is because it's just, I feel like it's like at a certain point, it's like there is obedience, and it's just, you know you should be obedient, but it's just different when it's more forced or voluntary. When it's more of a forced obedience, it's just you're doing it because you have to, but it's not because your heart may be fully in it, you know? But when it's a voluntary obedience, you are doing it because you want to. You know you're honoring God, you know you're loving God, and it's more of you're able to do it without hesitation. So it definitely makes a difference in knowing how it works. So obedience goes with all of these, like learning to trust God, it takes obedience. Learning to have a stronger faith, it takes obedience. So all these go in hand with obedience and just how it works together. Alright, so these are some of the examples of obedience in the Bible. These aren't obviously all of them. I mean, there's many more. The ones I focused on were Abraham, Ruth, Paul, and Jesus, but you can even include David, Joshua, Moses, John the Baptist, Peter, and there's many more examples in there. But if you're thinking about Abraham, you can see when we began, he left his homeland to follow God's will. He obeyed without hesitation, even when he was asked to sacrifice his one and only legitimate son, Isaac. This story definitely made me it's just like more than anything, it's just like it made me just think about his unwavering faith and obedience, you know? It's just like when you're asked to do something that could take that heavy of a toll, it's just like, I can't imagine how much of a battle it could have been, you know, in your heart and just in your mind. It's just like you have to sacrifice your own child. But his faith in God, it's just that obedience that he had. He knew that it was all part of God's plan. And in the end, Isaac was saved because he drove God down. But it just made me really think about obedience, just to be at that point where we can take that step without having fear or just knowing it's just like God's plan is perfect and he will make all things right. The other one is Ruth. She stayed loyal to Naomi, her mother-in-law, and God, even though she could have started over once her husband died. She remained obedient, worked hard, listened to Naomi. Boaz saw her character and redeemed Naomi's family line. Was also the ancestor of Jesus. This is another example of how obedience worked. So loyalty and obedience, sacrifice and obedience. With Paul, he began his voyage to Rome. Paul gave multiple warnings throughout the journey to stop the ship. But in the end, it ended with the centurion and people of the ship being encouraged by Paul, sharing the hope of God with them. At the end of this, you can even see the centurion was actually, when the prisoners were told to actually kill off people, centurion actually in his heart wanted to save Paul. He made sure that it wasn't done because he actually wanted to save Paul by the end of this also. And Jesus. So Jesus began his journey knowing he came into the world to do so. Even as he goes through his journey, he is constantly praying to God and seeking his guidance. Jesus also agonized, but he knew his purpose for being here and our eternal salvation. It just makes me also think, Jesus being in this world, being God in human form, he was still praying to God because he knew the struggles, he knew he needed strength, he knew the agony of it all, even though he was here for our salvation. It showed the human emotion, it showed what we face, and it just, the obedience it takes, to make sure that we are actually giving that same type of, not effort, same type of faith, same type of obedience, and relying on God and relying on Christ for strength and just in all situations that we are, in storms that we go through. So our obedience, the way, can also be seen. As Christians and believers, our obedience can be seen outwardly and inward obedience is truly seen between us and Christ. Outward obedience is still seen between us and Christ, but can also be seen by others. The way we honor God and follow Christ should be represented in our walk individually, but also with others around us. So some questions that came to mind were, are we making sure that our reason for obedience is to honor God, or just for our self-interest? Romans 16 verse 19 says, for your obedience has become known to all. Therefore I am glad on your behalf, but I want you to be wise in what is good and simple concerning evil. So it's easy to be, say we're obedient, but it's also knowing. Are we doing it because we're trying to honor God, or are we doing it because we know it's something that might just make us feel good, or that might look good in front of others, you know? It's knowing that the reason we do what we do is to help others, but to serve God, but to know that our heart is in the right spot. Making sure that the way we're serving. So if our heart isn't there in the right spot, then obviously it could be for self-interest, it could be for just our own gratification, you know? And it's just, you never want that to take over where we're honoring God. The other aspect is our obedience just a statement for others to see and hear, and then going on about life? But be doers of James 1 verse 22 to 25. Be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror, where he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks at the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the word, this one will be blessed in what he does. So, this definitely, in the past couple of weeks, that definitely, even for myself, was big, because it's just, I knew I said yes to giving this message out, and I knew I could have prepared in this probably in the last 2 or 3 days if I wanted to, and just focused on everything else. But I just noticed, it's like, after I said yes, it was just, I just started listening to even more podcasts from the day I said yes. It was just like, the first couple of days, it was just like, man, do I really want to do this, you know? It's just like, am I really going to have time for this? But then I noticed myself just listening to more podcasts and just spending even more time with God than I usually would. And it was actually great, because even for the way I was preparing, just the way I keep communication with Dennis and just talking to Joby on a daily basis, it was just like, I can notice it's like, even for myself, it's just like the obedience, but also just there was a calm, I would say. There's been a calm where it's just like, I know in situations where I should be panicking, where I would be overwhelmed, I was just like, just staying more relieved and just finding comfort in God, you know, and it's just like understanding this is something I should be doing, and it's just, this is what God, I think, was trying to instill and just teaching me. It's just like being more obedient and just getting back into His Word and just going through life, you know? It's just like you want to say yes, and then you want to just serve God, but sometimes it might just be half-hearted without even realizing it, and then really seeing a difference when you're fully committing that time in. And so, even for myself, that was just great. So as noted, Christ sought wisdom from God his Father. As parents, we should also be seeking guidance in this world and how to live as parents and guide our children and know Christ. We are meant to be the image of Christ as believers, or for our children, they should see Christ through us in our everyday lives. This doesn't mean we'll be perfect, but that is why we have a relationship with Christ, knowing because we are sinners and only have salvation because of his perfect sacrifice. Children, obey your parents. Ephesians 6, verse 1 to 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. So I would say, I mean, even for this, I was like, just bringing this in was because, I mean, I remember it's just like, with us, it's always a roller coaster every day. The moment we wake up to the end of the day, but it's just knowing that S is really saying right and wrong and just understanding it more and more. It's just like sometimes now when he does something wrong, he does look at our reactions a lot more. And I realized he started asking me more and more now. It's just like when he does something, he just asks, "Are you happy, Dad?" Because it's just like he looks at the reaction. He wants to know, am I going to be mad? Am I disciplining him? Or am I in terms of just knowing that he did something wrong, or it's just can I respond in a way that shows love, and just still teaching. We're still teaching him. It's just like what you did was wrong, but it's more to keep you safe and help you understand. It's not because we're mad at you. It's because we're mad that it could be something that hurts you or hurts someone else. We're just learning to do this. So it's just living by that example, just as Christ shows us. I mean, we can pray, we praise to God. I mean, why would we not do that, It's just like for all the things that we need to find the strength. Oh, okay. So yeah. So finishing off, it's just knowing that obedience works in many different ways and many different aspects. Like I knew it's just when I was working through this message, it's just like there's so many different factors, like the characteristics that were listed. I think I've changed this message a couple times in the last couple of weeks, and even yesterday I was just changing this because there's so many different ways to characterize it and how it can be found and seen and just simplifying it. But overall, it's just knowing where our heart is and just knowing that the reason we are being obedient is because we want to honor God, we want to serve Christ with our full heart. Sometimes when we're just forced to do it, it feels more of a burden rather than us doing it because we know we're happy and joyful being obedient. So just knowing, I mean, even through the storms of life, it's just that obedience, God sees it, God honors it, and God knows where our heart is, and He's going to continue to be there for us. We will fail. I mean, one of the main chapters of the book is even with David that I didn't put in, but it's just knowing where he did sin. And it's not that he sinned accidentally, he meditated the sin, and then he did continue on to the sin. But then he knew he had to ask for repentance. And with God's forgiveness, he also continued to become obedient and understanding that this was how he should serve and this was how he should live with God, And it's just understanding we will make mistakes, but we also need to understand how to serve wholeheartedly and just with a voluntary heart. But also knowing those around us see how we're living and what we're doing. It's just knowing that we can also rely on those around us to help us stay on that path. I'm going to end off there. Thank you for this day, for allowing me to speak your word. I just pray that the words that you did speak through me,